side.
I'd like to begin with a confession. I do not like priest gatherings. Conferences, assemblies, they make me feel uncomfortable. But that's not the case with this assembly here. From the get-go, it was really extraordinary. And I can't tell you how happy I am to be here and to be invited to share some thoughts with you relative to the changing face of the priesthood 12 years later. Here's the outline of our time together that I have in mind. I'd like to offer some introductory remarks and then go from the introductory remarks to setting the context for my thoughts on the changing face of the priesthood 12 years later. After the context, I would like some table discussions, and I brought 50 of these handouts, and I think we might have a little more than 50 here, but as long as we have one for each table, you certainly don't want to listen to me for an hour and 20 minutes or so. But anyway, after that discussion, we'll address the changing face of the priesthood as I see it 12 years later. Thank you. But I'd like to begin by telling you of a mother who went to her son's bedroom door on a Sunday morning. She stood in the door and said to her son, "Get up, you'll be late for Mass." And her son said to her, "I'm not going to Mass." The mother was quite surprised because her son always went to Mass. And she said, "Get up, get out of that bed. You're going to Mass. You always go to Mass." And he said, "No, I'm not going to Mass." And he said, "I'll give you 2 reasons, Mother. I don't like those people, and they don't like me." She said, "Well, I'm going to give you 2 reasons why you're going to Mass. You're 52 years old, and you're the pastor." I know many of you have heard that story before. Walter Brueggemann, and I know many of you are familiar with his work, once said this: "What we are about is serious conversation leading to blessed communion." I think that's what we're about as we gather here for this assembly. Serious conversation leading to blessed communion. Our church desperately needs that serious conversation. I'm afraid there is little of it, far too little of it. Lots of conversation, but it seems to be actually lots of speaking, but it's more one way than honest conversation. And when people have a serious conversation, the blessed communion that follows is pregnant with the Holy Spirit. When there is blessed communion, the Spirit always will emerge. Now, last evening we had an extraordinary experience of communal lament. The same Walter Brueggemann, in his book Prophetic Imagination, said that lament, grieving, leads to prophetic action. And that's why it can be hard at times for our church leaders to publicly lament, because lament leads to prophecy. Prophecy in the sense of a new insight, a new awareness of what has happened. And so I offer that as a possible reason why at least some of our official leaders are slow to publicly lament. It's been said in a number of different ways, but we have gathered here for these few days as a band of imperfect brothers. We could say a broken brotherhood, a wounded brotherhood, but a brotherhood nonetheless. And I really wasn't prepared to say this. I do think of priests as my brothers. I don't always think of priests as a brotherhood of which I am a member. But I feel that now I am a part of a broken, wounded brotherhood, but a real brotherhood. And we're healing each other as we gather for these important days. What struck me last night was the absence of clericalism. I don't know if you might have felt the same way, but there was an equality about last evening that I don't always sense at conventions or assemblies of priests. Afterwards, during the social, I mentioned to a few of you that the word that came to my mind after we concluded our session last evening was the word real. There was something that happened that was real. Now that's a throwaway word, isn't it? It's real. But see, wherever there's clericalism, there's inauthenticity. To say something was real, I think is fairly profound. And some of the mystics of our tradition have said that reality is another name for God. Another name for God. So we wounded healers speak and listen out of our weakness. And as St. Paul has said, this is our strength. We're gathering here not as know-it-alls, but as people who are willing to listen to each other and to engage in serious conversation. And because we are wounded, and you know the wounds as well as anyone, we listen and speak with a certain humility. And I think that's so important. I think many of you know that Thomas Merton said, "In humility is perfect freedom." Because when we're really humble, we do not care too much what other people think of us. We're always going to care somewhat. But if we're really humble, we don't care too much what other people think of us because we're convinced that we're okay in God's eyes. That's the message we try to communicate to people. But if lament leads to prophecy, might not humility lead to prophecy? And so it's dangerous when a group of men like us gather together to lament and to recognize that we stand humbly before God. And so when this happens, righteous anger and righteous frustration can lead to a holy resolve. And what that resolve is unfolding in these days that we spend together. I felt last evening that we presbyters are not against anyone. We're not against bishops. We're not against reactionary Catholics who doubt our fidelity. We are not against those who think we are disloyal to the church or worse. We're not against him, but we are for the gospel. We are for the people of God, for the church. We are for the commonweal, the common good of not only the church, but of creation. This "for" is obviously a radical "for." And that's what we're here to clarify. What are we for? What gives us a sense of meaning? That's pretty much my introduction to our session this afternoon. I was very, very moved by what happened last evening. And authenticity, the realness of what we spoke to each other and how we listened to each other. The context for my remark today is a study that came out last year in book form called Same Call, Different Men. Some of you may have seen this book in 2009. I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyway, this is the source of the context for our conversation this afternoon. Imagine this. A team of 3 doctors enter a consulting room and take their places across from an anxious patient. "We have good news for you and bad news for you," one of them says. "We'll begin," they say, with slight smiles meant to engender hope, "we'll begin with the good news. Doctors Gautier, Pearl, and Strichter are not physicians, however, but seasoned sociologists who last year published the book that I just held up for your attention, Same Call, Different Men." It was a study undertaken by CARA, the Center for Research in the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. And I think many of you are familiar with CARA. And it was sponsored by the National Association of Priest Councils. It was a fascinating study to me. I've been asked to review it for America, and so it's one of the things that prompted me to take a look at it. This study discovers that we priests are extremely happy men. Almost deliriously happy. So listen to this. 97% of the priests interviewed in this 2009 study that the book is based on said that they were very happy or pretty happy. Of that number, 2/3 said they were very happy. Now, previous research has shown that only 38% of priests claim to be very happy. So, what's going on here? And then 97% of the priests, the same percentage, said they would never leave the priesthood. It's not a possibility. So I think that's very interesting. In fact, in 1970, 88% of priests said that there's no likelihood they would ever leave the priesthood. But in 2009, that percentage went from 88% to 97%. So, are there any facts that we can assemble here into our consciousness that might influence our discussion this afternoon? And I'm just going to mention a few of them. By the way, this study is done by sociologists, so there are graphs and statistical analysis and reports. But one of the interesting aspects of this book is its narrative character. They have they have interviewed numerous priests to get their narratives about what life has been like for them as a priest. So this is sociology with a soul, or sociology with a face. And then the commentaries in the back of the book are also very, very worthwhile reading. But let's take a look at the picture painted by these 3 sociologists. We are told that in 1970, there were 58,000 priests in the United States, and their average age was 35. And fewer than 10% of them were over 65. Okay, so now we're going to jump ahead to 2009. Now, in 2009, there are 41,000 priests in the United States. I mean, that's counting everybody who can sit up and take nourishment. 41,000 priests in the United States. I wasn't looking at any of you. And now the average age is 63. And 40% of the 41,000 priests of today are over the age of 65. So I think that gives us a rather stark picture. So do you remember the three doctors said to the patient, and of course the patient is the priesthood, good news and bad news. The good news is that we are deliriously happy. And more than that, I do think the research has been replicated. So it's not this one study that has found that we are happy men. Other research sociologists have reported the same thing. Now they say that one of the factors in drawing men to the priesthood, in fact they not only say this, research has underwritten it, is that happy priests, men who seem truly happy and who do interesting work, that is the #1 factor in attracting candidates to the seminary. So the good news is that we're so happy. The bad news is if we are so happy, and if our life is so fulfilling and meaningful, why aren't our seminaries full? One of the questions that Gautier, Pearl, and Strichter asked is, when is the last time you have encouraged someone to consider being a priest? I should have said a word of introduction before I started my remarks here, so just let me intersect this. My name is Don Cozzens. I teach at John Carroll University in Cleveland. I'm retired on the presbyteral role of the diocese, but I'm still working full-time. In my contact with students at John Carroll University, I regularly have asked young men if they've ever thought of being a priest. These are men that have been active in campus ministry, liturgical ministry, social ministry, giving up their spring breaks to go to Central American countries on service trips. Just great guys. Of the probably 24 men I've asked, have you ever thought about being a priest? I think only one has said no. That means that's like a 97% response that said yes. And they were flattered that I asked. It was like, thank you for asking me, Father. Yeah, I have thought about being a priest. But then they'll kind of straighten up and say, but I'd like to have a family. And see, and that seems to end the conversation. Now, many of you know that in the year, since 1970 to the 1980s, there was a real decline in seminary enrollment. I'm a former seminary rector, so I'm aware of the fact that our seminaries are not even half full. But over the last 25 years, seminary enrollment has leveled off. This is theological enrollment. These are men in theology. And so for the last 25 years or so, with little peaks and little dips, the number of theologians preparing for the priesthood is about 3,500. What do you think of that? Well, we are told by the same sociologists that have written this book that for every 100 priests that we lose because of either death, lose to active ministry, because of death, retirement, leaves of absence, or being taken out of active ministry, we only have a 30% replacement rate. So for every 100 that we lose, we pick up 30. You don't have to be a mathematician to know where that is going. Another surprising phenomenon or finding to this study is that the morale and satisfaction among priests has actually improved over time. Now, when you think of the clergy sexual abuse scandals, all I can do is scratch my head and say what's happening. When you think of the declining numbers of men preparing for the priesthood, all I can do is scratch my head. When you think of the grain of the priesthood, I just wonder why it is that our overall satisfaction is so high. I don't want to anticipate the discussion that will be taking place at the tables, but I think it's because we love doing what we do. We love celebrating Eucharist and the sacraments. I think we love ministry to people. Sometimes I think what's happening to the priesthood is similar to what's happening to physicians today. I think you may have heard various physicians say to you, you know, I love being a doctor, but I do not like the paperwork and the administrative controls and what's happening to American medicine. It's not fun being a doctor. But I love interacting with my patients. Can that be happening to the priesthood? That we really love doing what priests do. But we have problems, as the research has shown, and as our unofficial research revealed last evening, that we have significant problems with authority. So at this point now, I've been speaking for about 25 minutes. I'm very happy to say more about the changing face of the priesthood. But at this time, I'd like to pause to see if there are any comments or questions from the assembly at large.
Just a question. Do you think the fact that the number of children and families that are just to a point where there's so few children that parents don't want that one male to go into the priesthood as one of the factors?
I think that's very true. If I were to ask the average number of siblings that you men have in this room here, I think it might be around 4, maybe 3 to 5. Some of 9. Marty has 9 siblings. You're one of 10. So I think there are a lot of people who have been called to the priesthood. It's a nice tune. No, I do think that that's a critical factor. What's the average size of a Catholic family in terms of siblings today? 2, and some reports say 1.8, something like that. And I think you're absolutely right. If you have 2 children, chances are you'll have 1 son, and you might be interested in having the name continue on in posterity. So I do think that's a factor. And Phil, did you have your hand up? You had 5 siblings? But you're from Ireland.
Small family.
I'm sorry. Then you, Jerry.
Well, you asked if there were any comments. My comment is I'm euphorically happy as a priest. It's been a great life, but I'm certainly glad that I began this in 1967 instead of 2007. Mostly because the system has become so much more restrictive. I mean, I feel free enough that if Archbishop Burke had done what he threatened to do to me, I would have just said, well, it's been a good life, And I could have walked away from it after 40-some years. But to invite somebody into this totally dysfunctional system and maybe to have them have 45 years to look at this and to know that they're coming into a situation where the numbers are so against them that they're going to be so alone, have so little support, and so much access to pornography on their computer in their loneliness, I mean, it's just so sick that I couldn't invite anybody into it.
Thank you. Jerry?
On sabbatical, a priest asked me one time, he said, if I were your bishop, I would be concerned that you didn't love your job more, that you weren't happier at your work. And I said, I love the work. My problem is by the bishops not doing their job, you're threatening my ability to do mine. Now, I'm asking in terms of this study, do they make a difference or differentiation between the job and lifestyle? Because I think you can find different answers in each category.
They make a number of distinctions. They did not make a distinction in terms of lifestyle, although they did ask questions about loneliness and community and that kind of support. Yes?
I'm from Milwaukee. We have Sacred Heart School of Theology for the lay vocation, as we say. And I'm just wondering, as doctors get more and more demoralized with their profession, I understand that many professionals are leaving because of stressors. And as they maybe enter another career, would there be a possibility that there are more priests coming out of later in life and second careers? I know the younger guys getting ordained, or some of them are second, but I'm talking about even older, like 50 plus.
Well, the question was, he agrees that physicians could be tiring of the profession, even though they like healing people. And is it not possible that men entering the seminary today are second career, or maybe even third career? I think you're very right. The average age of a seminarian in the United States today is 35. The average age of a seminarian at ordination is 37. I think we still are trying to figure out the implications here. We're investing a lot in the training of men for the priesthood, we know that. They're going to actually serve the church and serve parishioners for a much shorter period of time. Many of the men in this room have been ordained well over 50 years. Let's jump ahead 20 years and then imagine an assembly of priests of this number. You won't have as many men who have been ordained 50 years or more. Yes?
I believe I've read that in the last decade or so of the newly ordained priests, 1 out of 7 will leave within 5 years. Is that accurate, or has it been reflected in that study?
This study referred to, the people leaving, and I don't recall a percentage. It was like 1 out of 7. It was much higher a decade or two ago. But I think many of us would agree the number of men leaving active ministry, either to marry or for other reasons, it has tapered off in recent years. But that's a very good question. So I know that when we had high school seminaries, I think only 3 to 5% of the students that began in the 9th grade reached ordination.
Dan?
Sorry.
What effect is the bulging seminaries in the third world going to have on us?
Well, right now, about a third of the priests that are ordained in the United States are born in other countries. And so your question, Rich, is significant here and central here, because I think many bishops, as they anticipate this dramatic drop in the number of priests that will have to minister at their parishes, are looking outside the borders of the United States. And this study does ask foreign-born priests serving in the United States, what's it like? And many of them said it's very, very hard. They feel like they are second-class priests and not always welcomed warmly by the American-born priests they happen to be serving with. But that figure of 3,500 seminarians, there's approximately 1/3, it depends. The Pacific states on the to the west, bordering on the Pacific Ocean, like Los Angeles, I'm thinking of right now, has a higher percentage of men that are ordained who have not been born in the United States than you would find in dioceses in the Midwest. That's very true. All right, I'd like to do now is have you respond to a few discussion questions, and I have brought 50 of them here, and I'm just going to ask for some help. For you to start a few on this side. How about one for each table? Okay. You can just take one and then pass them back. It's kind of crowded here and hard for me to get through. To pass some of those to the back. And let's just take 3 minutes or less to pass those out.
We need one.
All right, we'll take one over here.
Table's big.
Wearing your midterms, have you found the challenges? When was the last time you heard someone becoming a preacher? Think of the most stinging criticism you received as a
Let me read the discussion starter questions. At your table, you are free to address any one of these or ignore all of them, take a 10-minute power nap. But here's what I'm proposing to you. If you had your choice again, would you enter the priesthood? Another question, where in your ministry as priest have you found challenges to your integrity? When was the last time you encouraged someone to consider becoming a priest? And think of the most stinging criticism you have received as a priest. What were the circumstances? What aspects of your ministry most affirm you as a priest? So, respond to any one of those on your table, and I'd like to suggest you take about 10 minutes for this discussion.
Decides which one to do. Go around quickly, first, second, third, and see what captures your attention, or they want to pick.
At 65, yes. 30 years ago, no.
Courage. I think I was 13 when I went to the seminary in Josephine.
The flip side of it.
I do not encourage kids that age to go. I spent 30 years working in campus ministry at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and I think that's an okay time, probably if they're in college, they should work their way through it and make a decision afterwards. But as we know, what gets in the way is the so-called sacrament marriage of churches is it's a sacrament. I think that's the debt they have in it. But I think I would do it again. But right now, when I think about staying in and sticking with it, it's largely to keep saying there was a Vatican II, and I still believe in it. I want to go down high. Like Andrew really said, they keep expecting me to quit, but I'm not going to give them satisfaction.
When I entered the priesthood again, I just had my 50th anniversary. I'll start with saying I've always been happy. Very happy. Acquired twice by two different missions, two different pastors. I've had a good life, but I have no complaints. What I do again, I already know this. I recently did discourage a young man from going. I would have a hard time encouraging anyone to be a priest today. And to go to school. The atmosphere that we have at the church, I can't do that. Singing criticism, the aspects of the ministry that affirm me the most, Sunday liturgy or just being with the popes. Much limited to.
I don't know, but I can picture myself at 18, 25, whatever, ready to go to seminary. I have never regretted being a priest. I enjoyed it. No concept. You wouldn't give it up. It's been a hard time. I've never regretted it. I think sometimes I feel that it's a challenge to integrity. When you get trying to twist people out of shape to get them into an annulment, I don't want to marry their sexual orientation, let them or not let them receive communion. Those times I don't know that I think it is my integrity. It's just a very painful moment. Trying on the one hand to be faithful to the church. I'm sure remember these people in the church. And be faithful to them. And I think I've changed a good bit over the years. And I think just being, for me, I love God for it. I spent half my life doing something. Deal with the family from cradle to grave. Wonderful experience for me.
It's going to be difficult because look to the future. It's saying it's right
Generally, I consider myself happy.
Aún si ha habido mucha crítica que yo he recibido, sobre todo de los obispos.
Even if I have received certain criticism as a result of particular conditions,
especialmente cuando yo fui rector del seminario nacional,
especially when I was rector of the National Seminary.
Siempre hubo discusiones de la forma como orientar a los estudiantes.
There's always discussions about how to orient and guide the students.
Y después tuve que seguir el seminario.
Then I had to leave the seminary to finish me out the seminary.
Puedo decir que es el momento más duro que yo recibí como sacerdote.
That you could say was the worst moment I had experienced as a priest.
Y en ese momento pensé dejar el sacerdocio.
And at the time I was seriously thinking about leaving the priesthood.
Pero continué estudiando y eso me ayudó mucho.
But instead I continued studying. I used to be able to say that I had never had a day I would left the priesthood. I said that all the way to the day that Hunt House was dropped to my world. And that day, for 24 hours, I seriously said, what if I leave protest health? I decided to leave, but I used to be able to say that across my mind.
I think in those moments I wonder what the integrity of the church is. I'm judging the church had no
What seminary?
San Salvador.
Oh, San Salvador.
Like you, I went to the minor seminary. Jesus. I have been for 41 say what I really believe. You gotta get your hands very rough. I wasn't aware of any of those terms at the time. I wonder if we don't. I'm very happy with this now. Maybe I am happy with this. Especially a lot of good work. And of God and sin half the state of Alabama, 4% Catholic, we're sort of underground, 100 miles. I see the company talk last night. We hardly know who he is, we hardly know who I am, we care less about it. Single marriage,
A lot more freedom is what you're saying.
What's been said about it, I have hope for the future. I thought Anthony Ruff's having hope. It's sad to see such a poor Catholic bishop being
2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, please.
The scene is operating for a long
life that I live, now they're going to come out and
there's no integrity.
they have no, that's not negative, but what I would
if we start talking back next to the Archbishop and the bishops all back down, you sound like you're telling us how to go. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, I'm glad of that. I said, you guys can't even go to church. Why the hell do you think so? Government. It's not that it gets drawn out and the feedback.
To be celebrated, huh?
I don't mind at all. It's strange turnaround. Like 2,400 families in the parish of think about race. So excited. Stay away from the teenagers.
Just being asked this question about have you encouraged someone to be a priest? It's kind of strange because it just crystallizes on me right now. I've actually seen 10 to 1.
May I have your attention, please?
For women.
We're certainly not going to ask every table to give a little summary, but is there anyone who would like to comment on what they may have said to their table mates or what they heard that struck them? Just in case somebody cared to make that point. Yes.
I was struck by there's a number of men here who, when asked that question about whether or not they would choose to be a priest again, first answered it positively and then said, well, on reflection, if it was today that I was faced with that choice, I would not choose. In the context of today's choice. That was right.
I'm fine. That's all right. I can make myself. I found that, and I found it over the years to be a false question, because there's what you call the historicity of truth. Why we did what we did when we did it had to do with a whole socioeconomic, familial, faith, community, everything. So you say, would you do it again? It's like people in the movies who are 40 years old and want to go back to when they were in high school. They get these machines and they go back. You know, it cannot happen. So he says, would you want to be a priest again? Well, at 71 years old, it's a different question than 18. And it's a false question. It's kind of, because I'm not going to make that choice in the same way at all, out of a life lived. So I don't find it as helpful as I do confusing.
Thank you. Philosophically, I couldn't agree more with you. I do want to say, though, that the sociologists included that question in their study. I think it can shed some kind of a light on the paradox that I'm trying to identify here this afternoon.
They just aren't as smart as you and I are.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said. There's another hand over here.
We drew a distinction between happiness in the priesthood in terms of ministry and happiness in terms of lifestyle. They're two quite different things. And maybe I would like to pass on one, but I wouldn't like to pass on the other.
Thanks to your asking the question, it just crystallized in my mind how many young men I might have encouraged to priesthood, and I've encouraged some who have also shown specific interest, but I think it's about 10 to 1 the women that I would have encouraged in that direction and did help get degrees, liturgy degrees and theology degrees and so forth. That's where the interest is, and that's where the skill set is in the church.
Thank you very much for that. I've heard a number of people say the Holy Spirit isn't holding out on us in terms of calls to the priesthood. Are we willing to face that? So, yes.
I think some of us have found young people we'd like to encourage, but we'd also want to say, but don't pay any attention to what they tell you in the seminary.
Well, I believe them. Actually, thank you for that observation, because as a former seminary rector, and I know that a lot of men in the room who had backgrounds in seminary work, can I just tell you one of the toughest things I found is that there was a secondary formation program going on. It was nicknamed Friends Like Us. And there would be seminarians on Sunday evenings leaving the seminary grounds. In this day and age, it's not like a monastery. And going to a rectory of a very traditional conservative pastor, being wined and dined. And the seminarians were told, in effect, your seminary is a liberal seminary, so remain a submarine until you're ordained. You know what the answers are. Yes, you're open to women. Let them serve in every way that they can. Just bide your time. And then once you're ordained, you will save the priesthood. You will.
Right.
So it's really a hard situation to deal with.
I've never gotten taught in seminary. I'm 40 years ordained, but I've found in general the seminaries are more progressive, the faculty. Not all of them, there's a number of them. I went to the Josephinum. I wouldn't send a seminarian back to the Josephinum. But in probably seminaries, it seems to me, are holding out longer with the Vatican Council, longer with the spirit of it. I don't know how much longer they can make it because new appointments going in. But in general, I give the seminary guys pretty good credit for having studied, understood, and in the face of the submariners, as you're saying, they've continued to, I think, teach what the church is really about and not willing to go backwards. So maybe we're at half and half of the seminaries today, but I think some of the guys are still doing a good job
inside the seminary?
I would like to say I think many of our seminaries are doing a very good job. So thank you for that observation there. I couldn't agree more with it. I think what I'd like to do, though, is move on to the second half of our workshop this afternoon, which is the changing face of the priesthood 12 years later. When the room was smaller, I knew I'd have no difficulty with this photograph. But I'm going to hold it up here. I'll have it at the table when this workshop is over if you'd like to get a closer look. There are two theologians sitting next to each other having a beer. And one theologian is Karl Rahner, and the other theologian is Joseph Ratzinger. I would love to have a contest to put a little bubble of each and try to figure out what Karl Rahner is whispering in the ear of Joseph Ratzinger. But I think it's a classic picture. I found it on the door of a...
He's saying, Joe, you really pissed me off.
There will be other contestants. We're not going to declare you the winner, Phil. What is going on? I am going to comment on the changing face of the priesthood, but I do want to call your attention to a book published in Australia. The Australian priests are terrific guys, as I think we are. The book is called Our Fathers, and it's not a sociological study in the strict sense, but a marvelous window into what Australian Catholic priests really think about their lives and their church. I think a companion book like this on the American church might prove to be very interesting and very helpful.
Author?
The authors are Chris McGillion, McGillion, and John O'Carroll, O''Carroll, published by John Garrett Publishers. They're almost like a sister publication to Liturgical Press. That's not the right term, but they cooperate with Liturgical Press. This book is here if you'd like to take a look at it. But now, the changing face of the priesthood 12 years later. I ran into Andrew Greeley shortly after this book came out, and actually it was about 2 years after this book came out, and he said, so Don, you've been fired as rector of the seminary. And I had to tell him I was not fired. He said, no, I know you were fired. Well, I didn't mind arguing with Andrew Greeley. I thought I would know if I was fired or not. But then, this guy's so smart. Yeah, he's really smart. I started thinking, what if I was fired? And the bishop was so smart that I didn't know it. Talk about grace leadership. But maybe tonight at the social, if you'd like to know how I came to leave the seminary, I'll tell you. First chapter in the changing face of the priesthood was about identity. We've heard a good deal about identity. Vatican II priests, John Paul II priests, cultic model, servant leader model, ontological change, archetypal call. We don't have the theological, I don't have the theological firepower to solve that question about identity. But I would like to say that more and more people understand that any priest who is clerical, any priest who has a sense of himself that deserves privilege simply because of his ecclesiastical status, that doesn't work anymore. And so my concern is that we priests be as human as we can be, as real as we can be, as authentic as we can be. And that's always a struggle for everyone in whatever walk of life you're in. But if we can be, first of all, honest disciples, called to live out our baptismal dignity as ordained priests, recognizing that we are wounded healers, we're going to be fine. But the cultural war dividing our church today and the cultural wars dividing our priesthood today can be traced back to identity. And I think there needs to be more theological work on the sacrament of orders. So I'm not going to say anything more about identity at this time. The second chapter, for those of you who have read the book, and more for those of you who have not read the book, is about integrity. Following the publication of this book, I gave a number of talks to various priest associations. And a number of priests said to me, chapter 2 struck them, struck a chord in them. There is a wonderful Benedictine monk, theologian, poet at St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, Killian MacDonald, who started writing poetry at the age of 75 after becoming a world-class theologian. Killian MacDonald has a poem in which he has these lines: "No grand betrayals, we lacked the impudent will, we died of small treasons." When I read that poem, I just had to put the book down. No grand betrayals, we lacked the impudent will, we died of small treasons. He was referring to his brother monks there as they were burying one of their monks. See, I think our integrity is at stake, and I think one of the things that has prompted me to join the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests, and perhaps it's something that has prompted you to do so, is maybe my integrity is at stake. We have a wonderful church, we have a wounded church, we have a wonderful presbyteral brotherhood, and we have a wounded presbyteral brotherhood. We love to celebrate the Eucharist, and that the grace of being able to celebrate without being self-conscious has been taken away from us. And so that core moment of fulfillment has been snatched from us. At least many of us feel that way. So in this present moment, what am I called to do as an adult disciple who is ordained to priestly ministry? For some of us, it's just carry on as you're carrying on. For others of us, it means listening contemplatively so that I might speak honestly. For some of us, it means writing letters. For some of us, it means using the parish bulletin to call forth or to raise the consciousness of our parishioners. I cannot tell anyone what he or she might do to maintain his or her integrity, but I do sense in talking to priests throughout the U.S. and overseas as well, that sometimes we feel our integrity is at stake, and we're looking for like a path to follow. I think this assembly here is helping a lot of us to say, I am trying to be a man of integrity. It's like the humility not to care too much what other people think of you. We are men of the church, ordained to be teachers of the church's wisdom. What happens to us when we find ourselves in conflict with church teaching, and I'm speaking here of non-doctrinal teaching. What happens then? How do we resolve the tension between being official spokespersons of the church and men of integrity trying to really care about the people with whom we worship and live? The third chapter of The Changing Face of the Priesthood was the title of it was Loving as a Celibate. And over the years, I've really come to believe that we need two things on a more or less regular basis to be a healthy person. And it's important that we are healthy people because that's going to impact the way we preach and teach and minister to people. I think we need intimacy and transcendence on a regular basis. Now, what is a regular basis? That's going to vary from person to person based on temperament and personality. And by intimate, both of these terms are loaded and they're not good terms, but I can't find anything better at this time. What do I mean by intimacy? That's a tricky word in our culture because it's a word that means sexual intimacy. And that's not how I'm using the word, although I'm not excluding sexual intimacy from the term intimacy. When we are intimate with a few friends, we are willing not only to share our shortcomings, our faults, the pettiness of our lives. It's easier for us, I think, sometimes to talk to a brother priest and talk about the fact that I'm complaining, bitching about the bishop or troublesome parishioners. It might be easier to acknowledge some of our faults than it is to acknowledge some of our dreams and ideals. If you have been blessed with intimate friendship, paradoxically, it is going to help you to live a fulfilled celibate life. When I was in the seminary, I was told, num quam solus cum sola. Keep a vestment case between you and a woman. Never be the first at a party or the last to leave. And that's not a good way of looking at celibacy. So how do we celibate men regularly experience the joy of close, meaningful friendship? Well, some people would say, don't, because it is too dangerous. I think it is more dangerous than trying to be an emotional Lone Ranger. Now, we priests know a lot of people. We have more acquaintances than most people have. I don't know how much real friendship we have. And we've tried hard to build networks of friendship among priests. I know of a priest support group that met regularly for years, made up of approximately 10 men. And when one of those men left to marry, the support group knew nothing of the relationship, of the struggle. In spite of faith sharing, life sharing, I think priests can be lonely people even though they know countless people and might have a very fascinating social life. Perhaps I should put it this way. Do we have the capacity for honest, meaningful, celibate, intimate friendship with both men and women? Do we have that capacity? If there is that kind of graced potential, sometimes graced reality, then I think we can be fulfilled and happy men, and it's going to radiate out of us. People are going to say, this person is real. A great, great compliment. The other side of the coin to intimacy is transcendence. And by transcendence, it has a philosophical meaning, psychological meaning, common everyday meaning. When you are caught up in a transcendent experience, you lose track of two things. You lose track of time, and you lose track of space. Children are in transcendent moments all the time. You know, go out and play for half an hour, and the half an hour goes by in a minute. When we're caught up in something meaningful, we lose track of time. I'd like to suggest few of us last evening looked at our watch because something real was happening, and we were tuned into each other. And maybe this beautiful boardroom here, the beautiful view outside the windows, all of a sudden we lost track of that because we were listening to some honest communion among men who love the church and see stuff about the church that isn't right. See, I think many of us experience moments of transcendence, not always, but sometimes when we celebrate Eucharist and the sacraments. But I think the challenge to love as a celibate is to realize that it shouldn't be only looked at as refraining from sexual relationships. I think we have been created for intimacy. And I think the church has a lot of work to do when we say to an individual who wants to be a priest, God is calling you to be a priest. God is giving you the charism of celibacy. How do we know that? How do we know the mind of God? For thousands of years, for a millennium, we have had a married priesthood. We've had 39 married popes, as many of you know, and popes who were saints had sons who were saints and popes. So yes, underneath this chapter on loving as a celibate is the question of mandatory celibacy for diocesan priests. My religious order brothers here, the way I look at your life is that God has called you to both priesthood and to community, and you feel that call. And so when I've written about celibacy, I try to be very clear about affirming the charism of celibacy. But I also ask, how can you legislate a charism? I don't think that's possible. The next chapter is where I put on my Sigmund Freud cap, and it's about what I dare to call the presbyteral Oedipal complex. The fact that we have referred to each other as brothers, that's good news and that's bad news. Because brothers, if Freud is right, have an instinct to compete or at least to compare. One of the things that struck me over the years, being a priest in Cleveland, 47 years now, is that I've noticed a subtle and sometimes not so subtle competition to catch the eye of our Father. And that's why family life can be so tricky. When we're ordained, as a young man, we are the apple of our bishop's eye. And then as the years go by, we realize the bishop has maybe hundreds of priests. And if there's any truth to this concept that I'm suggesting here of a presbyteral Oedipal complex, how does a priest resolve that? He resolves that by realizing that he is an adult and his brothers are adults, and even the bishop, who is both older brother and father, is an adult. Many of us have resolved our Oedipal complex, our presbyteral Oedipal complex, years ago. For some of us, joining the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests is a way to resolve the Oedipal complex. A good retreat can do the same thing. I need to be, at the same time, a man of the church and my own man. Please, God, help me to do that. Be a man of the church and my own man at the same time. The next chapter dealt with me drawing on the work of Carl Jung. And he indicated that it's not easy to become an adult. Chronologically, we should be very adult. If we are 60, on average, 63 years old. But here's how I began the chapter. It's chapter 5, Becoming a Man, and I quote from the work of two psychologists, Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. Here's what they wrote in one of their books. The drug dealer, the ducking and diving political leader, the wife beater, the chronically crabby boss, the hotshot junior executive, the unfaithful husband, the company yes man, the indifferent graduate school advisor, the holier-than-thou minister, the gang member. All these men have something in common. They are all boys pretending to be men. I think sometimes we can find priests who are boys pretending to be men. There's no one way to become a real adult in any walk of life. I'm suggesting it can be more difficult in the priesthood. Andrew Greeley said, why is it that seasoned men who have proven themselves as priests and pastors, when they're called into the chancery, sit outside the bishop's office with a knot in their stomach? It's because we're vassals to the Lord Liege. And some of us have beautifully worked that out, and I would say more than a few of us have not. The next chapter is a chapter that I was highly criticized for. It was about the sexual abuse crisis. Now, I think many of you know the sexual abuse crisis in the United States broke into national news in 1985 with the Lafayette, Louisiana scandals that people just couldn't believe. In fact, the National Catholic Reporter broke that story when they wrote about it in 1985. They spent many months consulting with attorneys because they knew all hell would break loose. And then Jason Berry was the writer who got the byline after much research. So we knew that we had a problem in 1985. In 1992, the James Porter situation in Fall River, Massachusetts was the second wake-up call. We still let the dust settle. After a few years, forgot about it. But then in 2002, January 6th, the Boston Globe broke the story in Boston. Now that would have gone the same way the Porter scandal did in 1992, and the Lafayette, Louisiana scandal went in 1983 to 85. What was the difference? A Catholic Superior Court judge who ordered that the heretofore secret files and records of the Archdiocese of Boston be made public. Well, then many of you know, from the middle of January 2002, that whole winter and early spring was like a tsunami. But writing about it in 2000 was not politic of me. I had some people say, yes, there is an issue here, but you shouldn't write about it because you'll be giving ammunition to our enemies. So secrecy and a lack of transparency and accountability. I think we have seen how badly we as a church have bungled that. And I'd like to point the finger at myself too, because before I went to the seminary as a rector, I was vicar for clergy and religious. In Cleveland, we called it secretary for clergy and religious. And I worked with people who reported being sexually abused. I had the responsibility of working with priests who were accused for abuse. And I hope I was a man of integrity during those years. And sometimes I knew what the bishop wanted. I hope on those occasions, when I knew what the bishop wanted to hear, that I told him what I thought he should hear and give him the counsel and advice that I felt I needed to give to him. I have my eye on the watch. Can you give me 5 more minutes? The next, my mother thanks you. The next chapter was also equally neuralgic. The next chapter was on sexual orientation in the priesthood. And here I really tried to be as careful as I could be, knowing that there are many, many competent, healthy, creative gay men in the priesthood. I decided to do a chapter on this issue because as rector of St. Mary's Seminary, I found that there were candidates coming to the seminary to take a look at it and then withdrawing. And this was dangerous because it was anecdotal, but I had talked to a number of seminary personnel and administrators who shared the same experience with me. That there were some apparently straight men who, after a visit to the seminary or getting to know some priests, and this could be their problem, but they said, you know, I don't think I'm comfortable here. And so I said, is it possible that the higher percentage of gay men in the priesthood and in our seminaries is actually prompting some straight men not to enter? I thought that issue needed to be addressed. That was really the chapter that was the most controversial. I think today we know that even the Vatican has addressed the issue. We've seen that with the 1995 instruction, or the 2005 instruction to bishops and seminary leaders and religious superiors, stating that men with strong same-sex attraction shouldn't be admitted. Men who have demonstrated in, say, gay pride parades should not be admitted. We don't ask a straight candidate for the priesthood, how strong is your sexual orientation? I think a sexual orientation, it's a part of your life. It's a part of your vitality. I don't want anybody to have a weak sexual orientation. Well, all I can tell you is got some wonderful letters that I can't tell you what they said. But I think over the last few years, those two chapters that were so controversial, the criticism has clearly softened because there are issues there. I was called before the Cleveland Presbyteral Council. I was then director of the seminary to face these 30 men who were telling the bishop that many of their priests had grave problems with Don Cozzens remaining as rector of St. Mary's Seminary. It was the closest to a church trial I think I've ever had. I came in and sat down next to the bishop, and each member of the Presbyteral Council made a comment based on his listening of the priests. I had some of these men criticize me, other men affirming me, saying, you know, you raised real issues, Don, and I'm glad you wrote the book. The verdict was that while the issues that I raised were real, they should not have been raised by a sitting rector. So that was the problem, see. I was an insider. So I should have waited until after I left the seminary. I wish I would have thought of it. It was a great opportunity for me to quote Pope John Paul II in Pastores Davos Vobis, because in that very, very important church document, Pope John Paul II said we should hold no information back from seminarians pertaining to the priesthood that is true about the priesthood. So I think I could have said, gentlemen, here I've been faithful to a papal document, but I didn't have the quickness of wit to say that. The final chapter is a conclusion chapter, and if you take a look at it, it comes close to the introductory remarks that I made today. The changing face of the priesthood. One editor at Liturgical Press said, well, let's just call it the changing priesthood. And I said, nope, we're not going to do that. Because in a sense, there is a constancy to the priesthood and to ministry. What's changing is the face of the priesthood. And it will continue to change. We're living our priesthood at this particular point, the beginning of the 21st century. It's not the worst of times, but we know it's not the best of times. And we priests are in a position to influence how the church navigates these troubled waters. So it's been great sailing with you this afternoon. Thank you very much. We don't have time for session 2. I'll be around if we have to.